by our dear sister Semira. The topic concerns the video about the West or the Americas violence and culture of violence, referring to the video I think Brother Shahid did on America does not appreciate the gravity of violence, I think is the title. So Semira will have a presentation of about 15 to 20 minutes. And then after that, we will have a discussion about it. That is supposed to last for about 15 minutes to an hour. Okay. So without further ado, Semira, go ahead, sister. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Nail. I hope you can all hear me. So this topic, it was chosen by Sister Nisa. Of course, I also supported it because due to the recent events, especially Aaron Bushnell's event that caused all the uproar. We were discussing the violence that is the culture of violence in the West, or as Brother Nail kept saying, America, which is basically what the West is in general, as we describe it in all the videos, especially with Mr. Brother Shahid's videos. So as I was just reading, I got carried away with the history of America. I've known a lot of these things before, but to just go through them again, it's like, I don't know how to describe it, but it was overwhelming. So what I will try to do right now is just to give you a brief history on the culture of violence. I wish Sister Waheedah was the one who was presenting this. Actually, when I was doing this, I said, oh, wow, I'm sure we will get some inputs from Sister Waheedah later on. So as we go through America's violent history, which is almost always overshadowed by the splendor of its achievement, but it's an open and shut case in the matter, like it's an open and shut case of the end justifies the means. That's basically what it is. But what is that end that America is trying to achieve? That is probably a question mark. If we start from the early colonial period and the conquest of the European settlers arriving on the shores of land inhabited by the indigenous people for centuries, and then the brutal saga of colonial violence over the territory, the resources, and sovereignty that caused the 90% decline in the indigenous population, and the untold suffering on the indigenous communities, leaving wounds that continue to haunt the collective conscience to this very day. Again, we should always think about, how does that justify the end? The end maybe is the reality that we are looking at now in these days. Then comes the westward expansion of the United States, further exacerbating this cycle of violence. As settlers pushed ever westward, they encountered resistance from the indigenous people who tried to defend their ancestral lands, the atrocities committed in the name of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was new for me, but it's a belief in America's divine mission to expand across the continent. Manifest destiny justified policies such as the annexation of Texas, the Oregon Trail migration, and the acquisition of vast territories, all at the expense of the indigenous lives and sovereignty. It was a concept deeply rooted in the belief in American exceptionalism and the idea of the United States as a unique and virtuous nation with a mission to spread democracy, civilization, and Protestant Christianity across the continent. The stain of violence persisted through the periods of slavery and the Civil War, defining the struggle for freedom and equality in America. All this is known to us. It's always overshadowed by the technological advancement of the US. and what it contributes to the rest of the world. But this is brutal. The institution of slavery, built on the brutal exploitation of African people, cast a long shadow over the nation's conscience. The Civil War fought over the question of slavery, and the states' rights claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands and tore the nation apart. The cost of freedom was paid in blood, as Americans grappled with the legacy of slavery and the promise of emancipation. Is this means? Does it justify the end? Yet even after the Civil War, violence continued to mar the fabric of American society in the struggle for workers' rights and social justice. American labor movements faced fierce opposition from powerful interests. Working men and women sacrificed with their blood in the pursuit of dignity and justice, only to encounter government-sanctioned violence, cases of police brutality and systemic racism, which has shaken the communities across the country, exposing deep-seated inequalities and injustices within the criminal justice system. The threat of state violence looms large, casting a shadow over the collective conscience. The depiction of violence in American popular culture, where it often takes center stage as the staple of entertainment, whether in blockbuster movies, primetime television shows, or action-packed video games, scenes of violence captivate audiences and command attention. From epic battles to high-speed chases, from gunfights to explosions, violence is often depicted as thrilling and even heroic, reinforcing dangerous stereotypes and glamorizing aggression as a means to resolve conflicts. Again, there is the sensationalization of news coverage, biased reporting, and inflammatory rhetoric. The media perpetuates fear, division, misinformation, exasperating tension, and fueling the cycle of violence. Perhaps the most troubling is the glorification of violence in American society, where it is often celebrated as a sign of strength, power, and dominance. From the political rhetoric to social media discourse, the language and imagery of violence pervade the public discourse, shaping the attitudes towards the conflict resolution and perpetuating a culture of aggression and impunity. In a society where might makes right and violence is seen as the legitimate means to achieve one's goals, the consequences are dire, leading to further injustice and suffering. All that I have been saying so far is all internal within the United States. But if we look at in the realm of foreign policy, where the machinery of war and conflict operates with devastating consequences, throughout its history, the United States has engaged in wars, military interventions, and conflicts abroad, often in pursuit of geopolitical interests and ideological agendas. From the jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of Iraq, American military might has left a trail of destruction and suffering in its wake. It has had a heavy toll on innocent lives and destabilizing entire regions. The violence perpetrated by the United States in foreign lands, coupled with its impunity, has brought us to the current event, witnessing the live-streaming genocide of the Palestinian people, bodies of children, women, and men shredded to pieces by the American war machinery. And somehow this is considered civilization. So what is the consequence that this legacy has on its own society and its place in the world, from the trauma inflicted on the survivors of the violence that it has perpetuated, the intergenerational wounds passed down through families and communities? The legacy of violence casts a long shadow over the nation's psyche. The dominant culture of violence has eroded trust, fractured social bonds, and deepened divisions within its society, exacerbating inequalities and fueling resentments that threaten to tear it apart. Perhaps the most insidious of all is the role of violence in perpetuating cycles of conflict and injustice, both at home, within its borders, and abroad. From the war on drugs to the war on terror, from police brutality to mass incarceration, the machinery of violence continues to churn, exacting the heavy toll on the most vulnerable. By perpetuating systems of oppression and inequality, violence perpetuates a cycle of suffering and injustice that traps its people in a never-ending cycle of conflict and despair. So, what is the end? What is the end to all these means of all this violence? If we are to consider that the white supremacist ideology that is driving all this, so what is the role of the white Americans? Do they acknowledge the legacy that brings about a sense of collective guilt and responsibility? And if they do, is that the recognition that their ancestors played insignificant role in perpetuating violence against indigenous people, enslaved individuals, marginalized communities? Does it weigh heavy on their conscience? If they do, are the white Americans to confront uncomfortable truth about their nation's past and the ways in which systems of oppression and equality have benefited them at the expense of others? Would this awareness foster a feeling of guilt, shame, and moral responsibility? Would it challenge them to reckon with their complicity in perpetuating systems of injustice? Would they grapple with the realization that the institutions and systems they benefit from are deeply rooted in the history of violence and oppression? If they do all that, if they do all this, would they then end up in Aaron Bushnell? In another Aaron Bushnell? Or would they have other alternatives? How are white Americans to acknowledge the deep-seated inequalities and divisions within American society? What should white Americans do? Do they acknowledge this legacy that brings about a sense of collective guilt and responsibility? And then what is our role in all this as Middle nations to help? Or is it our role even to help the white Americans? In what way can we do that? And is it, as I said, again, the end that they say is justified, but what is that end was the question that I asked in the beginning. And most of the time that is mentioned as the advancement of democracy, which is again questionable. The innovation and technological advancement that they claim, the cultural influence and diversity that they claim, the economic prosperity and opportunity, and the advancement of human rights and civil liberties. All these has been questioned. So what is then the end? To what end is the United States or the West striving for with all these victims, with all this carnage that it caused in the region and within itself? So this was the question that I want to discuss later on. I'm almost done. So the next part is, of course, America's history of violence for its global and its global reputation and its standing in the world. What this has caused on its own reputation. As a nation claiming to be founded on the principles of freedom, democracy, and human rights, America has undoubtedly fallen short of its ideals, tarnishing its reputation and undermining its credibility in the world stage. From the devastation of war to the erosion of civil liberties, America's legacy of violence has strained its relationship with allies and called into question its moral authority to lead. So one thing that that was mentioned in the video of Brother Shahid is that America is Europe's child, exaggerated and honed all the worst and best elements of European society. So America is the mutant, patricidal prodigy, offspring of Europe, and supersized everything about its forefathers in itself. That's what Brother Shahid mentioned in his video. So if America is Europe's child, that honed all the worst and the best elements of European society. Then what is Israel? Israel is the child of America and the grandchild of Europe, the offspring of the mutant patricidal prodigy, embodies a sinister force, their very existence shrouded in the darkness and malevolence, born of a lineage stained with blood. If that's so, how are we going to stop this intergenerational carnage? And also, if Europe has caused America, and America has caused Israel, what next? If we are going to look into Islamic civilization, I'd like to end this whole presentation with the verse in Surah Al-Hujurat 49:13. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is knowing and aware. This ayah, Sadaqallah al-Azim, this verse was revealed on the occasion of the conquest of Mecca, and it was during the time of prayer the Prophet ﷺ asked Sayyidina Bilal, and one of the pagans, Quraysh, cynically mocked Bilal because he was black, and he said, didn't he find anyone but this crowed man? And so this ayah came after previous ayahs of how Allah forbade backbiting and belittling other people, alerting mankind that they are all equal in their humanity. So I end my presentation here, and then we can now start discussion. Thank you.
Brother Shahid, as you are with us right now, perhaps you'd like to, as a white American yourself, maybe to comment on
she has silenced me. I'm speechless. It's mashallah. It's fantastic. You know, as I was listening to it, she mentioned a few times about sort of everyone overlooking America's violence, and that's one of the worst things that has happened, is that you know, the extent to which everyone has been convinced or has convinced themselves to overlook American violence. You know, telling ourselves that that we it's ironic, because it's like we're telling ourselves that we can overlook how bad America is because of how good America is. It makes no sense. It's like we because America advertises itself and claims all of these virtues and claims all of these noble, lofty values, and it associates, I mean, to use the corporate lexicon, they associate their brand with all of these virtues and all of these noble, lofty values, that we all agree on those values. We all like those values. They all sound wonderful. And so they've tricked people into thinking that if you are against America, or if you call out America for its crimes, that somehow you're against the values that their brand is associated with, even though they don't manifest those qualities and values in reality. And the only way that you can actually abide by and adhere to the values that they associate their brand with is by calling out America and by not overlooking their violence and their crime. But they've gotten everyone, you know, in a kind of a stupor, in like hypnotized into thinking that somehow America is still anyway, Americans I'm talking about have convinced themselves that America is still like the hope of the world, that it's this, you know, city on a hill, shining beacon of all of like it's the one who's carrying the mantle of all of these great civilizational values, and the rest of the world is in darkness and chaos. Never mind that they're causing the chaos, but the Americans are still able to convince themselves that they really are the embodiment, that their country is really the unique, special, you know, and as the sister mentioned with divine, the manifest destiny, like divinely appointed to lead the world into goodness and righteousness, while they're consistently, persistently, and insistently doing the opposite. And this is what causes that cognitive dissonance that I talk about. And she was talking about, okay, you're asking me about white Americans. I mean, there's the term everyone knows about, and I mentioned it in the Aaron Bushnell video, white guilt, which is, I mean, like, for example, I'll tell you just my personal experience. When I read the autobiography of Malcolm X in university, and it was the section before he actually converted to Islam properly. He was talking about the Nation of Islam, the Elijah Muhammad false prophet doctrine, and their doctrine is that white people are literally devils. And there's a whole section in there where he's talking about basically the proof that white people are devils. And I'm reading it as a white person going, I can't really argue with that. The everything that he's mentioning as the crimes that are attributed to and that were historically accurately committed by white people is irrefutable. So it's completely understandable that someone that any non-white person would reach the same conclusion that white people are devils. And it's so for a white person to read the same thing, and you don't have to read it in the autobiography of Malcolm X. You can just read history objectively, and it would be very difficult for you to draw a different conclusion about so-called white people being devils. And what does that do to your psyche, except to cause tremendous guilt and the cognitive dissonance? Because I put in the chat a speech from Hamlet by the king in Hamlet. If you're not familiar with the play, the king basically murders his brother for the sake of becoming king and marrying the king's wife, marrying his sister-in-law. And he is, to a certain extent, riddled with guilt for what he's done. But at the same time, he doesn't want to give up what he's gotten. He wants to still be king, and he still wants to have the wife. So he's stuck with what he's supposed to do. He can't repent because he still wants to have what he committed the crimes for. He can't give up the rewards or the treasures that he's gotten as a result of committing the crimes. And this is the position of white people in America. They know perfectly well. I mean, as I've said also in other videos, like, for example, my own ancestors, my own forefathers were poor farmers from Ireland and from Germany. And they were relatively recent arrivals in America, so they don't have a direct connection to America's history. And this is what makes you sort of think about the fact that why it's not accurate to say white people, because you're talking about a class of people who have who are responsible for the crimes and the similar crimes and the similar violence and oppression and tyranny has been inflicted on the masses of people in Europe, in the so-called white countries, and certainly in Ireland. It was inflicted on white people by white people. So we're talking about a whole culture of violence, a whole so-called civilization of violence and oppression and tyranny and predation that is just, as I said, it's a distinctive quality of this so-called civilization, of this so-called culture. So, but again, with regards to white people, they have cognitive dissonance, which is nothing but conscience suppression, because you have to suppress your conscience because you still want to, like the king in Hamlet, you still want to retain everything that you've gotten as a result of the crimes, whether they were committed by you or your forefathers or other white people's forefathers, and you're the beneficiary of that. But the truth is also that in America, everyone is the beneficiary of that. Even the people who have been the victims of America, they're all beneficiaries of that. They all enjoy a higher quality of life than the external victims of America, the foreign, outside, global victims of America. You know, they're not being bombed, for example, and forced into mines as children to mine the minerals to make the cell phones. They have the cell phones. I always go back to what Malcolm X actually said after he converted to Islam, which was that the only solution for white Americans, and then for America overall, the only solution for them, the only possible way out for them, is to accept Islam en masse. They can't be cured by any other way, because, like I said, when you overlook, it's when you actually look at the history, when you actually look at the crimes that they committed, it's absolutely breathtaking. It's astounding, and that anyone can go on as normal and can pretend that somehow this society can be normal. I mean, like I said, I think in one of the videos, I don't know if it was in that video or not, just chattel slavery. How do you think you can go on after that, after what you did? How do you actually think that you could, how can you convince yourself that your society can be normal after what you did? The fact is, you can't be normal. You've never been able to address what you did because it's too unspeakable. And because you still want to retain the benefits you got from having done the crimes. So they're really in an impossible position, and I don't see any way that they can ever find their way out of the pit that they're in, except, as I said, if they can possibly recognize the rescue that is the rescue ladder that is descended down into the pit for them, the rescue ladder of Islam, if they will climb out of it. But I don't see any other way.
Yeah, that was a very insightful bit, definitely, about the white guilt, and also the realization that white people are also oppressed as well. They are ruled by elites that don't care about their well-being, their mental or physical well-being as well. But okay,
I'm sorry to interrupt, brother. But
Sure.
And this is another tactic that the power structure has to fool people. The invention of the idea of white nationalism, that all white people are one team, when just about every white person in America, if, like I said in another video earlier, if you do look back at your forefathers, they were oppressed. They were serfs. They were, especially, like if you're Irish, for crying out loud, the Irish were in a terrible situation for 800 years. But they've created this idea of a white team, as if the white people in Europe and in America weren't oppressing each other. You're not on one team. They try to obscure the real power dynamics and the real system of tyranny to make you think, to make white people think that they are exclusively the beneficiaries and the perpetrators of all of the crimes associated with white people, when they themselves have been victims as well, historically, for centuries. by a class system. But they don't want to talk about this. Is something that they don't want to talk about. So they put in your head that this, like I've talked about before, this illusion of white nationalism, as if the entire history of Europe hasn't been internecine war between states and territories and even villages and the Vikings and so on. You've been doing nothing but fight each other all this time. There's no sense of white brotherhood. There's no sense of one white homogenous team. You've been oppressing each other and fighting each other and killing each other and raping and pillaging each other for centuries. And now you invent this idea of one big white team that everyone is supposed to be on, and you'll find that most of the people who actually believe in that are some of the most uneducated, impoverished, backwards, and themselves subjugated white people in America. The people who are themselves completely marginalized and looked down upon by the power structure. So it's there's so many. This is what I mean. It's such an intractable problem that you don't even have the way to have the way to have the way to get out of it. Except as I said, if Allah chooses to have mercy upon them and guide them to Islam.
Yeah, subhanAllah, that's entirely true. I mean, if you look back, the European history is riddled with what violence and oppression and wars, sectarian wars, and wars on many bases actually. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite our dear Middle Nation members to perhaps come to the stage, virtual stage, and express their opinions, or if they have any questions to Sister Semira or Brother Shahid, you can pose them now. So, okay, well, I'm a bit biased. I will start with Sister Waheedah, okay? Because I think we'll enjoy listening to her and learn from her as well. So, if you don't mind, Sister, could you shed some light on the topic?
Assalamu alaikum. This is a hard topic for me, and I did not expect to feel the level of emotion that I feel, but Sister Semira's presentation was just so riveting. It really called up a great deal of emotion for me. I believe that it is absolutely true at this point that the only out for the United States is the mass acceptance of Islam. I truly, deeply, logically believe that to be so. The level of violence in this society is just not sustainable going forward, and I believe that is why we're starting to feel truly deep fissures in the fabric of the American society. You simply cannot bear the flag of the United States, cannot bear the weight of all of these things without beginning to tear apart. And I did want to ask Brother Shahid how he came to the decision to go through all of the negative things that he went through once he left, and still decide to remain a Muslim and remain gone from here. I think that's a very interesting story, and I would like to hear some of that.
Well, okay. That's a to get into the specifics of me leaving the U.S. I think is a bit, it's a long story, but it was after after 9/11, and I was working for an Islamic organization, and everyone that I knew were involved with various Islamic organizations in Michigan. We were in Michigan, which has a very large Muslim population, a very active and organized Muslim population. And after 9/11, as Sister Waheedah knows, there was a serious crackdown on any Islamic organizations. Several charities were shut down. Several Islamic organizations were shut down, and harassed and intimidated by the federal government, by the one or more of the 17 intelligence agencies that Sister Waheedah always mentions. So the situation in America was already getting incredibly uncomfortable and dangerous. I knew a number of brothers who just like literally disappeared off the streets, and no one knew what happened to them. That they were apprehended and literally never heard from again. We don't know where they are. We don't know what happened to them. If they went to Guantanamo or what. But I mean, they presumably not Guantanamo because they weren't, on foreign soil. But no one ever heard what happened to them. So it was a very, very dark and dangerous situation. But even prior to that, I had already, before I moved to Michigan, I used to go to coffee shops to write. And I liked going to coffee shops to write because you could sort of people watch and you can write and then you can distract yourself and look around and so on, to sort of take a break and feed your thought process so that you can write more. But at a certain point, I remember very distinctly being in a coffee shop writing something and looking up and looking around me, and it just dawned on me, I would be so much more comfortable if I looked up from my paper at this coffee shop and I knew that everyone around me was Muslim. I would be so much more comfortable. And that made me aware of the discomfort that I had, looking around and realizing I'm the only one in this entire place that's a Muslim. And that makes it very difficult actually to relate to your own society, to your own population, because because obviously when you become a Muslim, you see the world very differently. You see life very differently, and you take your life more seriously than what the rank and file American does. Americans aren't serious people by and large, and we can get into how that has been inflicted on them to a certain extent. Triviality has been inflicted upon them to one extent or another. So, the decision to leave was always lurking in my mind of wanting to leave. I always said to myself that once I had children, and once the children reached school age, I wanted to be in a Muslim country. I didn't want my children going to school in America. And the circumstances around or following 9/11 and the persecution of Muslims, particularly anyone who was active in any way in spreading knowledge or talking about, because obviously, given my own character and my own nature, what I tend to talk about was politics and global affairs, and particularly I used to speak. One of the things that I did for the Islamic organization was to go around the country and sometimes to the UK to talk almost exclusively about Palestine. So anyone who was engaged in that sort of activity you were being intimidated and persecuted by the authorities. So the decision to leave was facilitated by the hostility of the American government and the American society towards Muslims and towards Islam, and basically towards anyone who told the truth. So, the decision to leave was partly my own and partly made for me by the enemies of Islam. and I say enemies of Islam, I don't mean the American people, but you know who I mean. In terms of the difficulties that I faced, the difficulties that I faced have to do with something that I've talked about before, which is that we have in the West, we have people, Muslims, who want to be muhajirun, but in the Muslim world, we don't have ansar. So when you go to a Muslim country, you're on your own. You have to find your own way. But yeah, it's not that easy to do it. But I mean, there was never any question about, you know, remaining a Muslim. Alhamdulillah, that was never an issue. But yeah, it's a challenge, and you just have to decide for yourself what's more challenging, the sort of inconveniences and bureaucratic red tape and expense that is associated with moving to a Muslim country. Is that worse, or is that more difficult than remaining where you are? And the conclusion for me and my family was that it would be much more difficult to have remained in the United States.
Thank you, brother, for sharing that. What I would like to do here is invite our sister Haya, who is a Palestinian, to perhaps talk about her perspective on American violence and how it impacts the rest of the world, more specifically Palestine and her people.
Yes, assalamu alaikum. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you. Alaikum salam. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Honestly, this, Semira, your presentation, it brought me much emotions and pain on top of the pain I already live with. Jazakallah Ghayr. It was brilliant. Yes, I am a Palestinian American. I was born in Chicago, raised in Islamic schools in the U.S. Then my father, when I was at the age of 9 years old, my father decided that we had to move to Jordan to, learn our Arabic. We had that time myself and my 5 other siblings, so we moved to Jordan. Exactly in the 1990, where the first Iraqi war was happening. So, alhamdulillah, we learned our Arabic, our Islam, our Deen, and then my father couldn't handle more than 5 years living there because it was extremely difficult for him since he lived in the U.S. for about 20 years or something, 25 years. There was not much opportunity work-wise. So we moved back to the U.S. and, we were always raised in the Islamic schools in the U.S. But the shift from moving from the U.S. to Jordan extremely influenced me. And when we went back to the US, I was a bit older. I was about 13, 14 years old. I could see the world for what it is. I could see the U.S. for what it was. And, I was waiting for the day that I would just move out. And honestly, I'm the only one out of my whole family who lives overseas. All my family still reside in the U.S. And apparently, like, the way I see it is you have to work on yourself. Like, each of us needs to work on ourselves, decolonizing ourselves, rejecting Western influence. It doesn't come easy. And I still actually have to work on my family, in that way, because I feel like they've been influenced, and it bothers me so much, and we're always fighting disagreeing and whatnot. But being a Palestinian American growing up in the US and then also in the Arab world, I guess I took the best of both worlds, inshallah, hoping yani. But it is, I mean, it brings pain seeing Muslims suffer for all these years. I mean, I grew up watching the war on Bosnia, Iraq, and all the other wars. And then 9/11 and what that brought to Muslims. I was there as well. I witnessed it. It was extremely difficult and scary. We had our local mosque burned. People killed, just randomly shot. It was difficult. So I don't know where this will lead, but inshallah, this is the reason I am in Middle Nation, and I'm passionate about our campaign. Inshallah, I believe with all my heart that if we work hard, we will be able to reach to the level that yes, Muslims will be in power, inshallah, one day, and the U.S. will be expelled, or whatever the outcome would be is better for the world. And I asked a question on the chat: what is it? And this question always is on my mind. Why is it that the voices of evil is much higher and powerful than the voices of the good people? Like if we take the U.S., I think there's a lot of good people. There's a lot of good white people and all this. But why is it that our voices are weak? Are we not doing enough? Are we are we lazy? Are we not doing what we should? Are we not organized? I mean, we have to get to the bottom of this in order to start moving and mobilizing in an efficient, effective manner. So that is my question, and I'll rest my mind there.
Sister, for all of the Muslims in the world and all of the people of the global South, I think we have to remember that there are people who sometimes literally, like with the Bilderberg group, there are people who sit around the table and plot and plan and scheme in order for things to happen to our countries the way that they happen. And conversely, Muslims do not sit around a table, plot and plan and scheme to harm Western nations. We do not do that. So we are getting this tremendous negative push from them, and we're not a kind of people to give back that same kind of negative energy. So we should not feel badly as a people or as groups of Islamic nations, because we just have to remember this is these people's intent. That's their intention. And we do not have a similar evil or negative intent. We're just trying to manage ourselves. We're not trying to take them over. They are not just trying to manage themselves. They are trying to take us over. And that's a major difference that we must remember, so that we're not too self-critical. We are the good guys in this equation. We really are.
Well, I understand that, but the thing is, why is it, if we know evil is there and plotting and planning all the time, even evil never sleeps, why is it we don't strategically predict the outcomes before it hits us, and to counterattack that? Why are we Muslims or Arabs or whatever, we're always late into finding solutions against or to counter, or to push these enemies, or what they planned or what they plotted. So that that just I don't know how to go about that, but I'm not sure if you guys understand me. But I mean, this question is always constantly on my mind. It's like, we know that evil doesn't sleep. We know they plot and plan. So why aren't we ready to counterattack that in a strategic manner?
If somebody has an answer, this is where you can present it, hopefully.
Maybe Brother Shahid can help me with,
to be honest with you, it's such an intriguing question, and it actually probably deserves a whole separate discussion, to be honest. That's a very deep subject to try to analyze. I completely understand what you're saying, and obviously this is something that I think all of us have wondered at some point, or continuously. I would actually, I don't want to disappoint you, but I would rather take time on this particular topic for its own discussion. It's a very deep topic.
Well, why don't we, for example, adopt it for the next week talk? Like, because we were at the end of the talk, we were supposed actually to come up with next meeting talk. What are we going to talk about?
I think that's not a bad idea. That's a really good subject, even though it's not directly about the Middle Nation content, but in a way it is, because to a certain extent, I think and I hope that what we're trying to do with Middle Nation is exactly what Sister Haya is talking about. We're trying to be proactive, and trying to strategize and prepare ourselves, prepare our ummah, and equip our ummah to do exactly that, to do exactly what she's talking about, just to strategize and to be ready and to be equipped to not only respond, but to preempt the efforts of basically of Shaitan and his soldiers. So I think it would be a good topic, inshallah, for the next one.
It would also be amazing if we had a video, maybe explaining, with Self Brother Shahid explaining, how we can do this or go out with this exactly.
I mean, when you I saw your question before in the chat before you mentioned it now verbally. I saw the question and immediately I started thinking about content for a video. So inshallah, I'll put one out soon.
Sister Waheedah, you wanted to ask something? Go ahead.
No, we just call it being on the back foot in my community. And so that's what we mean, where we're constantly reacting to something negative instead of being able to come up with a way to be proactive. I
mean, I think Sister Waheedah said it quite well. I mean, in summary, you can sort of put her explanation kind of comes down to the fact that goodness isn't aggressive by nature. Evil is aggressive by nature. So, this is kind of the difference. We're sort of always in this position of reacting because we're not aggressive. We're not trying, like as she said, we're not trying to take over. So, but the point that Sister Haya is making is, but we know that the aggression is there. So we should be preemptive about it. We should strategize about it. We should operate in the world knowing that this is an oppositional force against us. So we should, as Sister said, we need to get off the back foot, or at least a segment of our community needs to get off the back foot and be proactive. But I think it comes down to the fact that goodness isn't aggressive.
I agree with you. I really think it is the difference in the nature between that which is good and that which is evil. And we're not just a people who sit around planning to suck all of the life and blood from another people to tuck up under our behinds. We don't do that. And it becomes very, very hard for us to live in a constant state of reaction to a system that does operate that way every day.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's probably a topic for a whole segment. So perhaps we can discuss it at length next week.
Brother Shahid himself is proof of how Islam works and saves people, because there aren't too many people whiter than he. But he has just given that up as an identity, which was actually always the point. It's very instructive that this is our ustad, our leader. I know he doesn't like that word, but he came up with this concept and put it out. And because we are Muslims, none of us has any problem with what he looks like or where he was born. Now, that is unique to the way of life of Islam. It really is.
You know, it's something that I've touched on in some of the videos, I think, and I probably should expand on it, because I always, whenever I do a video that's highly critical of Western so-called civilization, I inevitably get comments from Westerners, and I'm assuming that they're white Westerners, because I generally don't get any sort of negative feedback or reactionary feedback from non-white Westerners, because they see and have experienced what I'm talking about. But white Westerners generally get defensive, and they'll say it's not the people, it's the government, or it's the power structure, or whatever. It's not the people, and it's important to emphasize to them that like being a Westerner, it doesn't have to do with geography. It has to do with mentality. If you have the Western mentality and you have a Western supremacist mentality, that's the problem. That's when you're what I would call a Westerner. And it's the same with white people. If being white means something to you as an identity, and that, I mean, it's just like what Malcolm X said when he came back from Hajj, that he interacted with and worshipped with people who would be classified in America as white, but who didn't think of themselves that way. It was just an incidental feature of their complexion. It had nothing to do with their mentality. But if it's something that's infecting and defining your way of thinking, your worldview, and your identity, then this is the issue. This has to do with the way that you are thinking about yourself, and then the way that you're thinking about everyone else. And the same goes for Western. That if you can remove this, if you can cure yourself from this, and not have the Western mentality, then then there's some hope for you. But if you're reacting defensively when I talk about the West, because you're a white Westerner, you need to understand that your society, it's as against you as it is against anyone else. Unless you're basically rich and powerful, and that they've just fooled you into thinking that you have this identity, that you share some kind of camaraderie or brotherhood with the people who are actually oppressing and exploiting you too. That you have to throw off and liberate yourself from this mentality, and actually be what your values are, and define yourself according to your values. And just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said with the ayah that sister quoted, that the best one is the person who has the most taqwa, the person who is the most pious. That your color and your nationality and whatever nation or geographic territory you come from is irrelevant. The only thing that determines your value and your quality as a human being is your belief and your values and your faith and your conduct and your deeds. And if another person is similar to you or resembles you in your conduct and belief and deeds and faith and mentality, then that person is your brother. and that's the team that you're on. Not your team isn't defined by your skin color or by your geographic territory or your nationality or anything like that. And you have to cure yourself from this way of thinking. And the only thing that can cure you from this way of thinking is Islam.
Yeah, thank you, brother. That's a very inspirational message, a very needed one actually for all of us. And so we come from different continents, different races, different ethnicities, but we are Muslims, right? That's the most important thing, obviously.
Yes, and I would also like to say this. Brother Shahid once said in one of his videos that we need to talk about our people, our way. And one of the ways that we need to talk about our people is to stop using the term of our enemy, races of man. There is no such thing. There's the human race that Allah created. There are not multiple races of man. And this is one of the worst things we can continue to do, which is to use their way of speaking, to describe our people.
Just to say what I thought about Sister Semira's presentation, it was epic, mashallah. I mean, it was academic and it was
Well, she's an academic, isn't she?
It was very powerful.
Thank you, mashallah. Thank you so much. It was really last minute. And at the end, I did not actually wrap it up properly because I got confused a little bit. But I was trying to say something about the Muslim expansionist theory that Muslims have expanded with the sword kind of rhetoric always on the media. Well, not now, but before when I was growing up. Actually, the first time I heard it was in my grade 6, my history teacher. And he was teaching us about crusades, and for some reason, he was a Christian, I forgot to mention that. He was a Christian teacher, so he was mentioning how Islam was spread in our country, which is Eritrea and Ethiopia and all that, through the sword. And he mentioned a specific person. He said Ahmed Grang, and I did not know. The funny part is we don't learn much about our own history. We learn about other people's history. I don't know why it is so in our curriculum. But when he mentioned that was the first time I heard about it. I've never heard about Islam spread through the sword. I know about conquests, which is a different thing. But then, as I was doing this presentation, it came to my mind, and I was going to search deeper into it. But then I said, no, this will take me to another dimension. It's going to go, deeper. So I was going to ask if that is the case, if this is something unique to my region where people think that Islam is spread to our country through the sword, or is it everywhere? Did everybody came across such thing?
Well, that's a
I was
cliche,
taught
right?
that in school growing up, and Americans, at least of my generation, that was the normal teaching from elementary school onward, that Islam was spread by the sword. That was simply what they taught us.
And
Yeah,
they
I
still
think
do, Sister Waheedah, they still do. Because I studied that in the US also growing up, unfortunately.
Assalamu alaikum. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a warlord. That's how he's portrayed, as a warlord. Exactly that phrase.
Yeah.
You hear it all the time.
From Jordan Peterson.
Not just him. Yeah, he amplifies that, but it's not his intention. Yeah.
Crazy, I tell you. Because if that is the case, you would wonder how Indonesia became Muslim there was no army there that went to there. Malaysia, all the Far East Muslim countries, the most populous one being Indonesia. So, yeah, that's another topic that would be really worth to be taken up by someone if that is possible, if it's something related to that is available in the Middle Nations content, right?
Yeah, it has something to do with Middle Nation because it is the way when it comes to mind decolonization, people are swamped by these ideas about slavery and having multiple wives, like when it comes to feminism and this idea of that Islam was spread by sword. There are things that actually Muslims feel like being attacked, and they cannot actually say anything about that. They cannot defend that. They don't really understand, and is the way you put it, we do not read about our history very much. That's very unfortunate. We actually just get what we get from the media and stuff, and that's it. So actually, thank you for the hint. That will be something very, very, I think, important to look at. So we have other topics as well. And I should maybe say, if anyone in the middle of a week or any time you feel like there's something you feel like it should feature in our talks, maybe you went through Brother Shahid's videos or anything Middle Nation content, and you feel like there's something that perhaps we can be talking or discussing in our talks here, you can actually DM me or say it in any group, and we will take it, or Nail or Nisa, and we can schedule something like a talk. We can ask someone to prepare a talk about that or discuss together. It will be really amazing.
One of the problems is that we have so many different topics to choose from. Honestly, if you go down the list of Middle Nation content, there's so much there. So feel free to suggest, and if you want, you can actually present yourself. We'd like to hear from you. And I mean, today's talk was absolutely amazing. All the speakers were brilliant, and I'm really happy that we have this on a regular basis.
Jazakumullah Ghayr for all those who spared their time, different time zones, to attend this particular talk. It was very, very warming, and and knowledge. We are getting knowledge from you, and your participation is highly appreciated, because we need as much as people to make these talks live and meaningful. So thank you so much, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.